So it should be on. Evening, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here with returning guest Bishop Dewar from, well, he's been in the news recently a lot with the King and his letter. So I'm delighted to have him on tonight. We've got a bit of a different twist tonight based off that letter and the Green Party recently. So the Greens have been in an ascendancy since Zach Palensky took over the party. Their membership is at over 200,000. They have a wide range of policies. You've got Zach Palensky, you've got Moffin Ali, the deputy leader. There's lots of different dynamics to this party compared to more traditional parties in the Labour-Tory dynamic, I guess. But there's been recent plans or recent reports that the Greens plan to de-establish the Church of England as the official state religion of the land, obviously King Charles as defender of the faith in the UK. I wanted to get the Bishop's view on that tonight, about the Greens in general, and whether, as a wider discussion point, whether there are any UK political parties that Christians themselves should look to vote and support. So, Bishop, without further ado, how are you? It's obviously been a big week for you. Yeah, how are things?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on. It's been an interesting week. I think is the nicest way of putting it. I certainly had no intention on Monday of waking up Tuesday morning and saying, right, I'm going to write to the King. We decided to write it as an open letter. And I thought, well, maybe a couple of hundred people might read it. On X, on my own X account, we topped 2 million views. And it's been posted on multiple other platforms. The ones that I've been able to chart, I think we're looking at a further 3 million views altogether. So as far as I know, we're somewhere around the 5 million plus views mark on what was said. It was quite a lengthy letter. It ran to like 3 pages when I printed it out to send to the King. I spoke from my heart, and I spoke as a man desperate to see our King fulfill his coronation oath as defender of the faith. In a time when Christianity is increasingly and acceleratingly under attack in the United Kingdom. And the issue with Zach Palensky and the Green Party was one of the contributing factors, probably the straw that broke the camel's back on my decision to write to the King. I've been thinking about it long and hard for several weeks. I guess, really, for me, being a traditional Anglican, the appointment of Sarah Mullally as the current Archbishop of Canterbury raised several concerns for me, theological concerns. And just looking at the way this country is going, looking at how Christianity is being persecuted in a constitutionally Christian country, it broke my heart at the state that this country is in. We have a socialist government that, to me, are bordering on dictatorial. We have the rise of the Greens in the United Kingdom, which really are no longer an environmental party. They are very much heading towards a communist party, aligned with people that, in my opinion, are dangerously close to being categorized in the Islamist categorization of Islamic believers, with this determination to overthrow the state government and impose a Islamic Sharia law upon the land. And history has shown time after time after time how, the communist, socialist, Islamist agenda does not go hand in hand. Iran is the perfect proof of that. 1979, there was a communist rebellion. The Islamists joined in as Islamists, excuse me, as we know him now. They sided with them, brought in leaders from Arabia, and once the revolution was over, the socialists were slaughtered, executed, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was born, and we've seen how that's worked for the last 47 years. So I greatly fear for the future of the country. I notice as of today, though, there's a Times article out how His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, was talking about his quiet faith and his commitment to the Church of England for when he becomes the sovereign, which I guess is a little inspiring. The timing of it seems somewhat ironic, given the both the media and public furor surrounding the open letter that I sent, which I think the last time I checked, we were about 4,500 signatories as well on the open letter. So yes, it's really been an interesting week. And ironically, the people that have attacked me the most have not attacked me for the letter. It's been people within the establishment church that have attacked me for my validity as an Anglican bishop, attacked me for the fact that, to them, I'm my orders, Anglican orders, are what we would call irregular because they're not recognized by the Church of England. But 85% of Anglican believers worldwide are no longer in communion with the See of Canterbury. So, the issues they're making, to me, are non-starters. My lines are of apostolic succession are as valid as the day is long, and have 4 channels back in validity. Dare I be so bold to say, probably more valid than most of the current Anglican bishops.
What do you mean by irregular orders? What do you mean by
so within as a bishop, we have this line of unbroken lineage between us and the apostles that Christ ministered to. We call that apostolic succession. So when I talk about lines, that's what I mean, the line of apostolic succession. My lines have 4 direct, through the centuries, the laying on of hands of bishop to bishop, and, Bishop of Rome being the Pope, and numerous archbishops of Canterbury, and even some through the Orthodox lines. So there is the validity of my succession, which has been called into question multiple times since Wednesday, is there. It's available for, in fact, Canon Phil Harris and 2 of the archbishops of the CAC, Archbishop Robert Gosling, my direct superior, and Archbishop Vince McLaughlin, who's the Archbishop of North America. They produced a 35-minute video talking about the CAC and the validity of our orders. Everybody talks about, I'm clearly illegitimate or irregular, and yet the CAC, Confessing Anglican Church, was present in Abuja just a few weeks ago for the GAFCON 26 conference by invitation, and were voting members of the GAFCON 26 conference. So clearly, if GAFCON can recognize us as legitimate and valid, then the rest of the Anglican world would, those that are not in communion with the See of Canterbury. So it's just been a bizarre week, Dan. Absolutely bizarre.
Has it shocked you? Obviously, the reaction that you've got compared to what you were expecting when you. I mean, you said,
it really, really surprised me. I genuinely thought, well, maybe we'll have a few hundred people might read it, a couple of thousand if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
And it garnered traction so quickly. I think I gained like 5,000 or 6,000 Twitter followers, X followers, in 2 or 3 hours. As a result,
really,
by the end,
the strength of feeling behind your message.
I think by God's grace, what has happened is that my letter has tapped very deeply into the public mood on growing concerns about Britain's Christian faith and our Christian culture and heritage that is repeatedly and incessantly under attack. And I think the public, I've had thousands of messages to thank me for writing the letter, and so many people in those numbers have said, Bishop, thank you for saying what needed to be said, or thank you for saying what we all feel, but didn't know how to express it. So yeah, I was really surprised by the way it's gone. Never expected it to go viral. Never expected that within a matter of days we'd have an admission of faith by the Prince of Wales. So I can only see that because of the timing as somewhat reactionary. Yeah. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit I was wrong, but it just seems rather peculiar that, 4 days after that, with the growing public support and interest that it picked up. I mean, we made it onto multiple news sites. GB News had us, wrote about it. Talk TV had me on to talk about it. I was on Mike Graham's show, and I've done a few others throughout the week since then, just talking about why I wrote the letter and what happened. And yeah, it's been really surprising. Did not realize the public felt the way that they do, so strongly and so deeply as they do.
It's very encouraging, isn't it? Because with the Greens and their plans to disestablish the Church of England, is that a sign of the British left? Because it's very interesting what you said, in your opening comments. The Greens don't really talk about green issues anymore. They talk about, some of the more radical ones are legalizing prostitution or drug use, for example. I don't really see Zach Polinsky going on the TV talking about solar panels or environmental issues. So what's the purpose behind the Greens doing this with the Church of England? What is the point of it, as far as you're concerned?
It's very obvious from the Denton Gorton by-election that the Greens have a voting pact or a strategic political alliance with, with members of the Islamic community, many of whom I would assume have kind of transitioned over from Labour, who they feel are now no longer doing enough to appease them, despite the fact that in my opinion, the Prime Minister is bending over backwards to appease the Islamic community. We've seen that with the new anti-Muslim hostility czar and definition, which they're encouraging various institutions to adopt, despite the fact it's non-statutory and therefore non-binding. They're certainly treating it like it is. So I think what's happened is the Greens have become a political home for the antithesis to what they call me as far right. It is the party of the far left, the real hard left wingers that care little for this country and care little for our history, our heritage, our foundations. And the proof of that is the fact that they have aligned themselves with men like the likes of Martin Ali that, clearly are fundamentalist in some of the things they say. And certainly to me on the Islamist spectrum, and although I don't like that term, and I think that, there's been a, what should we call it, a pause or a slowdown in interest in the Greens, where at the moment they came out to announce that they intend to disestablish the Church of England. Whenever you make a move like that politically, you don't create a balanced society or a more secular society. As my letter to the King says, you create a moral vacuum. And history has shown us time and time again that moral vacuums don't stay empty for long. So I think there is a distinct danger that we're heading in the direction of Iran in 1979 between and I don't call them socialists. To me, the Green Party are not socialists. Labour are still hardline socialists, but the Greens are behaving more and more like communists. If I could be so bold in that expression. And I think if they get into power, or if they got anywhere near power with an Islamic Green coalition, then we would be very close to seeing a repeat of Persia in 1979. And that really concerns me.
Do you see any prospect of that, though? Because the Greens only have a handful of MPs, for example. The Gorton by-election, which obviously they won, I would say they actually did, to their credit, run a very good ground campaign with lots of activists. I think that's something the left might do better than the right. There are people more committed for their cause, whatever we think of their cause, their belief and their determination to knock on doors, put leaflets through letterboxes.
But I want to interject something there. In that by-election, according to the election watchdog, we have the highest recorded numbers of election interference and illegal practices in voting booths that Britain has ever recorded. So if I was the electoral commissioners right now, I would be demanding that entire election be looked at, in that by-election result be looked at, because it's not like people were making complaints. You know, Joe Public was making complaints. These are the election watchdog that have recorded the highest numbers of election fraud to take place. It's very clear that for the first time in our history, we have blatant election fraud being allowed to happen, and for fear of reprisals, election officials doing nothing about it.
I take the point, Bish. Sorry to interrupt. I take the point, but that's been happening in places like, it's completely correct. I think both things are true at the same time. Things like that have been happening in Tower Hamlets, for example, for years and years. I can't recall his name right now. Is it Luther Rahman? He was done. He was convicted for election fraud. And then the day after he was allowed to come back in, he was voted in again by the Tower Hamlets residents. So I think what you're saying is absolutely true. And I know Reform complained about it. But I would say at the same time, I would say the Greens and the right could learn something from the left in that regard with activism, for example. But
I think their activism was very sectarian as well. You can't deny that. You know, they played a good game, but you know, when you look at, I mean, it's deceitful politics, however you look at it.
Yeah.
When you've got campaign flyers in Urdu and campaign flyers in English, and both say completely different things, you know, relative to the community that you're trying to convince to vote for you, you're not going to be able to live up to all the promises you make.
Because I know George Galloway did that as well years ago in some of his by-elections, obviously all in English though. Is that not smart politics? I'm not talking about the foreign language bit, which I completely disapprove of and I think is completely wrong. And it sets a precedent now, because especially because...
No, I think it's deceitful politics. It's a step further than what Labour did with their manifesto in 2024. You look at what Labour's enacted since they've come to power, and none of the none of the policies that they've brought in as swiftly as they've done. I mean, there are other things in their manifesto they're working on, but none of the policies they've actually brought in with the haste that they did bring in were in their manifesto. Where was assisted dying in their manifesto? Where were the amendments for full-term abortion in their manifesto? See, I think this country suffers greatly from one thing. I think manifestos should be legally binding. I think we need legislation through Parliament when we get a conservative, and I use small c, not big C for the party, a conservative government again, and if they have a majority, to bring forward legislation that manifestos must be legally binding. That you cannot bring forth legislation that is not in your manifesto, because it means that a political party is going to have to lay out their entire prospective administrative agenda for a parliament, because the administrative agenda that we're seeing now from Starmer and his regime, because it's not a government to me anymore, they are definitely a regime, has nothing to do with that 2024 election manifesto at all. It's like the moment they got into power, the manifesto has gone out the window and we're just going to do what we want to do. And it's blatantly obvious they are not listening to the public anymore. They are only pushing their own agenda. Look at the backlash that we've had. I mean, Starmer's at what, 15 or 16 U-turns already on public policy? That's, I mean, most prime ministers might achieve 3 or 4 in a 10 or 12 year tenure as prime minister. 16 in your first year, for goodness sake.
It's
and
incredible.
then you look at the other things that they're bringing in. You know, Justice Secretary David Lammy wants to do away with jury trials, and the reasoning for it is not even supported by the courts or the practitioners within the legal industry. It will only fix 1% of the problems. Nobody said that there was going to be a push for a legal definition of Islamophobia. I mean, that is by all intents and purposes a de facto blasphemy law through the back door. That wasn't in their manifesto. Why are we favoring one religious group over another and treating them like they're a race of people when they're not? Islam is a religion, whether people like it or not. I couldn't give a fig what your arguments are. It's a religious ideology. It has a theocratic underpinning, and it has a very radicalized governmental aspect that wants to impose Sharia law on every society it enters. But it is still a religion. Doesn't matter which country you've come from or what color your skin is, you can become a Muslim. So it's not a race. And I'm sick to my back teeth of how people are afraid to speak about it and criticize Islam. Every religion under the sun is not free from criticism, including my own. So, I think the way the Greens played that by-election, because I kind of went off topic then, the bitch went into a rant. It happens. I think it was incredibly deceitful. And I think that practice should be looked at by the Electoral Commission, because that is listen, I have no issues at all with election materials being printed in another language.
Okay.
I mean, the question is, should that really happen when English is the state language of the United Kingdom? Should all election publications be entirely in English, which I genuinely believe should be the way it should be, not for a racist or Islamophobic or every other phobic reason, but simply because that's the state language, and election materials which are, designed for lawful elections to Parliament and local council should be conducted in the state language. But to put material that, when translated into English, doesn't even come close to what you've printed in English, that is deceitful politics at a whole different level.
That's really interesting, because I agree with you on one, and we disagree on both. So I think the two letters, if they were all in English to two different groups, I would actually say is smart politics, because in America, might get a Republican say a message for conservatives and then a speech for Democrats, for example. Whereas I actually completely disagree with the foreign language aspect of materials, and that's just something I would have to agree to disagree. It's just
no. We don't disagree on that. Well, as I said, I actually have. However, I truly believe that all election materials should be in English.
Yeah.
So on that much, I agree, and listen. I get the point that you're making about letters to Democrats, letters to the Republicans. In that, we're not a two-party democracy in the United Kingdom. The reality is they wrote information that was relative to a culture and language of people. I'm not going to say race, because it wasn't about the color of somebody's skin. It was about their culture and their language, and that's not dependent on the color of skin. And when translated into English, what was being said in the Urdu posts, for example, did not match up to what was being written in the English ones. That is deceitful politics. Even if we accept or disagree that the election material can be printed in foreign languages, it must be a mirror reflection of what you're putting in the English, in my opinion. It cannot be different in any way, shape, or form. I get that there's syntax and verbs and various things with it that you might have to adapt some of it, but you can't write completely different material.
Okay.
Perhaps I'm too old-fashioned.
No, it's fair. It's a fair point. I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. But going back to the point you were saying at the start about your fear of the Greens and an Islamic alliance getting into power, do you see any prospect of that? Because at this point, I don't. I think Gorton and Denton's a very specific area where the Greens would do well because of the demographics. I don't see that at this point in England on a wider scale. So do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't see it being a possibility in the next election. It has widened the door through which sectarian politics is walking, and that is alarming in the United Kingdom. It really is, because we're a constitutionally Christian country, to have the aggressive rise of another religious ideology pushing a political agenda in the United Kingdom. That is something that should be nipped in the bud straight away. Somebody asked me the other day about Sharia courts and Sharia law, and talked about, well, they said, do you believe? I said, there is no law in the United Kingdom save the law of the United Kingdom. Don't care what you think. And then they said, oh, well, Sharia courts are only voluntary. I said, okay, you tell me one Muslim woman that has volunteered to go through the process of the accusations that are made by men in Sharia courts. You tell me one Muslim woman that has volunteered to go through the punishment dished out by Sharia courts in the United Kingdom. Sharia has no place in the United Kingdom at all. Not talking about the right to worship as a Muslim believer. Sharia law has no place in the United Kingdom whatsoever. So that's my concern, is that there are alliances taking place. And the trouble is this: the more excuse me, the more capitulation there is, for whatever reason, to an aggressive religion of the likes of Islam, the more it empowers them, the more emboldened they become. I give you an example. We are in the United Kingdom. This week, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, a proscribed terrorist organization in multiple countries all around the world, including across the English Channel, is talking about the need to push harder, to go further, to make sure they take over this country. Why is our Prime Minister refusing to proscribe the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, when other countries that are our allies have already done so? What is he afraid of?
It's an obvious answer.
It's simple.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, go on, Dan.
The answer's obvious, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Because if he does that, he loses the Muslim vote. And unfortunately, the Greens don't seem to care about that. The irony of it is that neither party is acknowledging the fact that if they formed a coalition and won, and the majority of the coalition were actually fundamentalist Muslims, they would kill them just as much as they would try and kill everybody else, according to their teachings. It really is. Sir Geoffrey Cox once said in an incredible speech from the Conservative front benches when he was Attorney General, really is, talking about Brexit, this really is like, turkeys voting for Christmas. And the socialists and the communists in the country and the lefties and the liberals, they really are the turkeys voting for Christmas in supporting this. It just dumbfounds me when I see women, that have championed women's rights and equality, chanting in support of Palestine, a nation where a woman is a second-class citizen to a man. She has no rights other than what her husband or father tell her she can have, where they're forced into wearing, either head coverings or head-to-toe coverings and yet, the reason being that their looks shouldn't tempt another man, and yet that same religion actually actively promotes the use of domestic violence as a form of discipline and encourages marital rape for a woman not to withhold herself from a man at any point. I mean, that's not my interpretation. That's what the text of their holy books and their hadith say. I can't get my head around it. I really can't.
So what do you think then about the structure of the Greens, in the sense of, you've got Zach Polanski, who's a Jewish homosexual. You've got Moffin Ali, who you've described as an Islamist or having Islamist sympathies. Why are so many Muslims voting for a party that, like I mentioned earlier, has talked about, they didn't put these in the leaflets, obviously, or the materials that went out to the Pakistani community, want to legalize prostitution, drug use, for example. They have no real respect for at least for Christianity, from what we can see. So why are Muslims joining the Greens and getting their communities to vote en masse for the Greens, in your view?
Because
when there's this huge ideological differences.
Because Zach Polanski is, in this situation, the useful idiot. That's all it boils down to. Trust me. If they become the largest, if the Islamic vote within the Green Party becomes the largest percentage, and Zach Polanski is by God turning his face away from the United Kingdom, leads them to electoral victory, I promise you, Zach Polanski will not become Prime Minister. The Muslim vote will make sure of that. And they cannot see that they are lining them, whether it's Labour or the Greens, they cannot see that they are lining this country up and lining their own parties up for Iran 79 to become Britain 29 or sooner. And it is just the lunacy of the left to align themselves so dangerously with a religious ideology that, given an inch of a chance, will absolutely wipe out their entire. Listen, you haven't got to worry about environmental policies from the Greens if they won't come to power with the Muslim vote and Labour. You can forget your socialist dreams if you come to power with the Muslim vote. They are opening the door to Sharia. They are opening the door to Britain becoming an Islamic state, in my opinion. And it is absolute lunacy. It really is. But the Islamic community, the likes of, I shouldn't say the Islamic community. That's a broad brush of the stroke of the brush. The fundamentalist within the Islamic community, the likes of the Mohsin Alis and others, they can see exactly where their bread's butter. We'll just use this man because his star's on the rise. Youngsters are falling for his thing. He hasn't thought about the economic implications of his policies. He doesn't care about. I mean, it's like he, to me, just wakes up and goes, right, what horse manure can I spout today? Let's call that policy. The implications. I mean, Britain would be a global laughingstock if Polanski and the Greens ever came to power. It's bad enough as it is with Labour now. We're already an international laughingstock, but we would be a truly global laughingstock. I don't think another country in the world would want to do business with us economically. It is to allow the Green Muslim coalition to come to power would be cultural, economic, and national suicide.
I'd have to agree. So that begs the question, Bishop, why is Zach Polanski done so well with membership? They're at over 200,000. The Greens, they've won their first ever by-election. What's he doing? Why is he being successful at the moment?
Because he's playing to a particular audience and they're buying it. He's making all manner of promises. I mean, just his thing about he wants to legalize Class A drugs. That's, right? And the model he uses, well, look at Spain and Portugal. Okay, right? Well, I get that. Problem is, Spain and Portugal do not have the substance abuse problems that the United Kingdom has. Spain and Portugal did not have the illicit sale of Class A drugs as a national problem that the United Kingdom has. The models don't fit, but it sounds right. And the problem is, he's speaking to particular demographics. He's speaking to the ultra liberals, and he's speaking to youngsters that have not grown up in an era where we had a strong moral compass, because the church has been silent and silently capitulating to other religions. The moral voice of the state has been slowly eradicated and legislated against, beginning with Blair in '97. And continuing now, because Starmer's on about trying to vote out the members of the House of the bishops out of the House of Lords. Society is. I mean, it's almost like we're living in the days of the Epicureans, where you can do whatever you want in pursuit of your own personal pleasure. And societies like that become hedonistic never last long. Look at the Roman Empire. Look at the Greeks when they become hedonistic. Look at the Syrian Empire. Look at the Persian Empire. The moment it turned into a hedonistic society, that empire was destroyed within a matter of years. And I just think the policies that I've read from the Greens and the things that Polanski says, it might resound well on TikTok or Instagram or whatever social media platform you're on. But we're not looking for a TikTok celebrity. We're not looking for an Instagram influencer. Running a country is a completely different ballgame altogether.
So, would you say he has charisma, though? So, genuinely. I know, Bishop, he doesn't have your politics. He's doing something right with his base.
Personally, I don't think he's charismatic.
Okay.
Personally, I think he's a slimy used car salesman. But that's my personal opinion. However, he has a way of, well, I'm sorry. I'm not going to, Right. I have an infamous line that I use in as many interviews as I possibly can. I don't sugarcoat anything. My name ain't Willy Wonka. And when I look at the caliber of the candidate he put forward for that by-election, that speaks volumes to me.
Hannah Spencer.
Yeah. Because I've listened to some of the things she said since she was elected. And if God was handing out brains, she thought he said trains because she missed one. There's no other way of putting it. I mean,
You got any examples, yeah, of what she said?
There was one I was looking at the other day. I can't think of it off now, and I should have prepared it so I had it for me. Yeah, but I was just listening to her, and I just thought, you know, if you ever recorded yourself talking, or you actually had a friend, they might tell you about how stupid some of the things that you say really sound. So I'm dumbfounded. I really am dumbfounded. And I'm dumbfounded that, they will align themselves with a party. They would align themselves with a part of the community that would, under the kind of Islamic rule that, the likes of Mohsin Ali and his lot of fundamentalists would like to see, Hannah wouldn't even be a candidate for parliament. This is how ridiculous they are. And I cannot, what I can't get my head round, and it does boil back to a religious standpoint, what I cannot get my head round is why on earth a man of Jewish descent, Jewish lineage, would align himself with a group of men that would rather see him dead than alive, because the religious texts tell them to kill the Jews, and think these are the people I want to get into a political partnership with. My mind boggles on that one.
Because of texts in the Quran, you mean?
Or texts in the Quran, texts in the Hadiths. They advocate for the absolute slaughtering of both the Christians and the Jews. An awful what we're seeing playing out in the Middle East. Why have Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran been so aggressive? Who's been their target? Israel. The political home, the land of the Jewish people. I mean,
sorry, Bishop, what would you say to those that would say there are verses in the Old Testament, though, that could be regarded as, I know there aren't verses, say, like you say, murder all Jews, etc., but there are verses in the Old Testament which are maybe seen as questionable when God, with the firstborns, with Pharaoh, for example, he killed all the firstborns. Those could be seen in a similar, I'm making a point.
But firstborns of who?
Of the Egyptians.
And the Jews. God didn't spare anybody.
No, people put the X's in their doors.
The sparing of the Jews was, and they were Egyptians that had Jewish slaves that painted the blood of the lamb that was sacrificed upon their doorposts. But God didn't spare just human either. God killed the firstborn of every animal.
Yeah.
Now, the answer to that question is we don't live in Old Testament times. We live under the grace of Christ. That's the whole purpose of the New Testament and the propitiating sacrifice of Christ on the cross of Calvary. The irrational transaction, we call it, one life for the good of billions. God isn't the God of justice and vengeance and war like he was in the, I can't say he was that in the Old Testament, but certain characteristics of his were displayed. But God is a God of grace and mercy and peace because of the sacrifice of his Son at Calvary. But nowhere in all of the Holy Text, whether you're a Torah reader, whether you're a reader of the Old Testament and the New Testament, nowhere in those texts does it tell you to go out and kill the infidel, slice their throat for maximum impact, rape their women so they don't enter heaven. These are all verses extracted from the Quran. So to me, how the church, and I'm kind of digressing here, but how the church, Roman Catholic Church, Anglican Church, and others can say the same God that calls Christ his only begotten Son in the Quran is the same God who refuses his deity and calls him nothing but a prophet who is a God of mercy and grace in the New Testament and is a God of death and warfare in the Quran and the Hadiths. That's not the same God. I don't care what they say. We might all have the same Abrahamic beginnings, but it is not the same God.
Understood and agreed. Bishop, before we move on to the next topic, I guess 2 quick questions. I don't know who will give quick answers though. What would you say to any Christians in the Green Party who may be listening to this that attend church weekly? And in answer to the question of this stream, is the Green Party anti-Christian?
I would say, are you mental? And yes, they are. How's that quick?
That's pretty quick. Okay. Thank you, Bishop. That was good. That was good.
Let me elaborate on the first one very, very briefly, because I cannot understand how you, in good conscience, as a Christian believer, could align yourself to the Green Party that is intent on wiping out your Christian beliefs and removing it from this state, and still call yourself a Christian believer. That's like saying, well, I've done a deal with the devil.
Thank you, Bishop. I'll just make one final point on that, which has gone through my head. There is a lot of moral cowardice on the left when it comes maybe to certain topics with certain communities. I'll think of halal slaughter, for example. You get lots and lots of people who are animal lovers, and then when it comes to halal slaughter, they just don't want to touch it.
I'm a devout animal lover. I've had horses and dogs throughout my life. We've still got 2 dogs now, and they're both getting older, and I'm dreading the day that we don't have them anymore. The thought of somebody hurting them fills me with rage. Yeah, I think is the nicest way of putting it. But I also grew up on a farm, and the thought of halal slaughter, and to some extent, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, kosher slaughter as well, but certainly halal slaughter, because of its, they say that it's done in a humane. There is nothing humane about slitting an animal's throat and letting it bleed to death. And what people talk about, well, in halal abattoirs, they use the very thing, the very principle of halal does not allow the animal to be stunned before it's slaughtered. And I think it is absolutely barbaric that we have, and as a nation that considers itself to be one of the world's leading nations when it comes to animal welfare, the very fact that we allow such a practice to take place on our shores, as a government and as a people, we should hang our heads in shame.
Completely agree. You can imagine if it was a small Christian denomination, the left would be
they'd have
all over it. Yeah,
we'd all be locked up if it was done in the name of Christ. It is. I mean,
when you've got stunts, when you've got means of stopping that pain and it's not used, it's disgusting.
I think what we don't. I've done multiple interviews on halal, particularly with Lauren the Insider, and my views are very, very public about it. But I think that methodology of animal slaughter is absolutely morally repugnant, and do not tell me that is animal welfare. This government should be absolutely, and by this government, I don't mean Starmer's Labour. I mean this government, as in the government that is controlling the country. I don't care which party you are. Any government that allows that to take place whilst advocating for animal welfare rights, and some of the most stringent animal welfare rights in the world, they should be taken around the back of the woodshed and beaten with a sharp stick, as my grandfather might have said.
Moral cowardice, absolutely. All political.
Unbelievable.
All political. Thank you, Bishop. For the last 15 minutes of the stream, we've obviously spoken about the Greens and not being the party for Christians. So if we move it on now to, in the current format, in 2026 Britain, who should Christians back, or is there no one? So to give a quick intro on this, we've got Reform the last 6 months or so. They've been a bit more pro-Christian than they were before. I'm sure you're aware of Rupert Lowe and Restore, who have just been registered now as a political party, seemingly quite Christian. The Tories were always traditionally, that's the key word, the supposed right-wing, more Christian party, but then introduced things such as gay marriage 10 or 15 years ago. So that's on the right. I don't really consider the left. I mean, look at Tim Farron with the Lib Dems, how he was treated as a Christian leader. Incredible. So I guess, can you give us your thoughts on, is there any particular party or parties, or is there no one that Christians should back at the moment?
I don't endorse individual parties. I have a responsibility to everybody on all sides of the political divide, despite the fact the media have tried to call me the far right bishop, and other things that they have attributed to me as, apparently I'm a Christian nationalist, which is news to me. Although I am both a Christian and a nationalist, I am not a Christian nationalist in the term that they mean. According to Sky News, I am the most dangerous man in Christendom, because apparently I'm single-handedly responsible for corrupting Christianity, which is attributing me both power and influence I never realized I had. So I'm very careful not to endorse political parties for one reason, and one reason only, that being the cure of souls on every side of the spectrum. And I caveat that by saying, somebody's asked me this week, why don't I ever speak at leftist events or liberal events? Well, the answer to that's quite simple, because none of them ever invite me. They'd be surprised to find out my answer wouldn't be no if I did get an invitation. My message isn't going to change, and they're not going to like it, but my audience would. The Bible's very clear on how we as Christians believe, and all I would ever encourage people is to read a party's manifesto, look at their leaders, look at what they're saying, not just the manifesto promises, because we know that manifestos ain't worth the paper they're printed on when people get into power, and determine for yourself which of the parties has the most, the worldview that most aligns with a biblical worldview, and allow that to form your conscience in how you vote. But a vote is a matter of moral conscience. It's got any Christian minister that advocates you should only vote in a particular way is failing in their responsibility to be a Christian minister. All I can do is outline, and I've tried it for years, and it's a tried and a methodology that I use when it comes to elections. I will talk about the policies. I never attack the people. I will attack the parties, and I will attack the policies, and I will just dissect them. But it is entirely up to the individual who they vote for. I can only offer you information to guide you in the way in which the scripture lays out a moral compass and a biblical worldview. And then it's up to you to vote on whichever party you feel is most aligned with that.
I find that really interesting, Bishop, your answer there, because when I go to, I'm a Catholic, so when I go to Mass each week, no priest has ever gone up during their homily and said who to vote for example, which makes sense. But given your nature and how public you are and how outspoken you are on certain topics, in a theoretical, if there was a certain party that was doing, I don't know, presumably on abortion, either ban abortion or greatly reduce abortion access, and euthanasia, pro-Christian policies, basically, if there was a party in theory doing all that, and then the public are ignorant, and you could have a role in getting people from the public to support that party and implement those pro-Christian policies in power, is that not, if you then weren't do that, is that not acting against self-interest or pro-Christian interest?
Well, I would be failing in my duty and my responsibility as a bishop to not highlight that to the public, not the party, the policy, and how it aligns with the biblical worldview. And that's what I do. I mean, I'm attacked regularly for my political beliefs, but nobody actually knows what I believe politically, because I don't talk about my personal beliefs on certain parties and policies and personalities within those parties. I can just present the evidence of this is what the Bible says. Now, it might be that, let's use a hypothetical so that I don't endorse any political party.
Sure.
The Star Wars party that are contending in the by-election in whatever constituency in the few months, are campaigning on the premise of they would reduce abortion to 12 weeks. or better. They'd reduce it to heartbeat. They would be the first party in Britain to bring in a heartbeat bill. Well, this is what the Bible talks about. And I would present the biblical case against abortion and leave it up to the individual to go, now you vote who you think most closely aligns with that. It's not my responsibility to say, well, Han Solo of the Star Wars party is the guy that I think should be in charge of fixing the abortion issue. And that's something I've learned that from personal experience. There was a point in my political past, because, I do the age-old adage that they tell us not to do, never mix religion and politics, and I've made a career out of both. I've made the mistake of attacking personalities, not the policies, and paid a very public and painful price for that. But that's not my responsibility as a cleric. My responsibility is to teach you what the Bible teaches you, so that your conscience guides you to who is most closely aligned with that, and you therefore vote. So in the hypothetical that you were talking about, my case would be, or my political rhetoric would be to highlight the issues concerning abortion, to highlight the concerns, the biblical perspective on abortion, not to say, I think that, our dear Han is probably the closest aligned with it. That's up to the moral conscience of the individual.
Okay, fair enough. No, it's very interesting. Are you able to comment on previous UK governments or governments abroad that the public can't?
Let's go for broke.
I'm curious to see if you've got any real life examples of a government that you actually considered truly Christian.
I don't think.
Question from the top of your head, yeah.
I don't think I've ever considered any government truly Christian unless you consider Vatican City, because people forget that whilst the Pope is elected Bishop of Rome, he's also a directly elected sovereign head of state. The Vatican City is a nation of its own, and that's probably the only Christian nation truly Christian nation on the planet. I wouldn't say there is an instance like that I could say, yeah, I've spoken into that situation. There, I try my best to present, and I'll be the first to admit that I fail at this, but I try my best to present a broad spectrum of understanding from policies of different parties, and then frame it in the light of Scripture. There hasn't really been a situation. Now, there was a situation concerning an individual candidate that I was speaking to in the US. I won't say which city, because then that would give it away. And that's not something I want to do. But this was a devout man of faith, a former, well, still is the pastor of a local church, and was running for the mayorship of the city, and very successfully won that campaign with 76% of the vote, unseating a 13 or 14-year Democrat incumbent in the process. And people asked me, why was I so pro the message that he was bringing forward? I never endorsed him as an individual candidate, but why was I so? I mean, it didn't make any difference. He was in a different country anyway. But why was I so supportive of the things he was saying? And my answer was quite simple: because his manifesto is straight out of Scripture, plain and simple. And he's been very successful as the city mayor. Sadly, a year ago Christmas, he lost his wife very, very unexpectedly, and had decided, I'm not sure, he might have changed his mind now, but had decided he wasn't going to run for a second term. And vast numbers of the city have asked him to reconsider because of what has come to the city as a result of his Christian beliefs being the driving force behind the way in which he's administered the city. So there's that example, for instance, and that was a city in the state of Georgia in the US. But like, as far as national governments, I can't really say I've ever been one that thought, oh, well, that's, you know, a truly Christian government. There are elements. Sadly, it's a phrase that I don't like to use, but it is true. But, you know, when looking at politics through a biblical worldview, looking at the US, for example, it's which is the lesser of two evils. In the UK, it's which is the lesser of multiple evils because of the number of political parties we have here. Which one is the most closely aligned with the biblical worldview, and which one is the lesser of all evils?
And you don't have to say who you vote for, but you do vote at elections, though.
Every election.
You just don't tell your congregation or audience.
My vote has changed a lot over the last 3 or 4 elections that we've had. I truly believe because we don't directly elect a head of state like the US election where you vote for a president.
Sure.
When it comes to parliamentary elections, I vote for who I think is either going to be or has been the best person for the local area. If that person I believe happens to be an incumbent, then it would be that. And that was something my grandfather instilled in me from a young age. My grandfather and grandmother were lifelong conservatives. But when it came to my grandmother being very seriously ill for the whatever time it was, because my grandmother had cancer many times throughout her life. When my grandfather needed help, the local MP, who is the late Paul Flynn of the Labour Party, he stepped up like you wouldn't believe. He proved he was a man of the people. And the help and the assistance that he gave my grandparents, my grandfather never forgot. And although he was a lifelong conservative, after that, Paul Flynn had his vote because he believed that Paul Flynn was the best man for the area and cared about his people. And Paul Flynn served that constituency right up till the day he died. And that must have been, 40-something years, nearly 50 years in Parliament serving that constituency. So, yeah, and nearly caused my grandparents to divorce because my grandmother couldn't get over the fact my grandfather was going to vote for a Labour man, being a lifelong Tory. And it's quite funny because in our local Labour club, my grandfather is the only conservative listed on the board of chairmen of the Labour club. But my grandfather and grandmother were very, very politically astute and very politically active and educated us from a very, very young age. I mean, some of the first things I can remember was sitting and watching political programs as a youngster. And then when we became kind of high school age, engaged us weekly, regularly on very deep conversations to do with politics and economics and state welfare and all that kind of stuff. So, that's how I formulate my opinion. My vote shifted away from the Conservative Party where it had been for a while, purely because of an interaction I had with David Cameron to do with the Same-Sex Marriage Act that they passed. I thought was highly deceitful and dubious. That they passed it because neither him nor the Lib Dems campaigned on a manifesto of same-sex marriage. And it was for 2 reasons that they pushed it. It was, one, to try and capture some of what in politics they call the pink vote. And the other part was because David Cameron's brother-in-law wanted to get married in church.
Right. I didn't know that. I didn't know that second point. I take the point they were trying to take it away as an attraction for the Labour Party to maybe campaign on it in the future to just diminish it. But I didn't know that second point. That's interesting.
Well, it backfired spectacularly for them because they didn't translate any of what they call the pink vote, says the man in the almost pink but more purple shirt, into the Conservative Party at all.
And it just annoyed their base. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Before that was a lovely story as well, Bishop, to end the stream. So thank you for that, and thank you very much for your time tonight. I guess the overall message of the stream is for Christians not to support the Greens.
Well, my overall suggestion would be for any Christian that happens to be watching both live and on the replay is if you're going to vote, and you must vote, it is imperative that we vote now. There is too much at stake in the life of this nation for not voting. There are too many enemies, and I don't mean immigrants or stuff like that. I mean, within the hallowed halls of Westminster and trying to get into Westminster, there are too many enemies living inside the city now for us not to vote. But you must vote a moral conscience, and that conscience must be guided by the Spirit of God and the Word of God given to us in Scripture, and then vote on the party that you think is the best aligned with that and puts your Christian beliefs and the nation's best interests at the forefront of what they believe and what they commit to as a party in their manifesto.
Brilliant. Wise words. Thank you, Bishop. All those watching live and all those on replay, if you've enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe. And many thanks for watching, everyone. All the best.